As the saying goes, home is where your story begins. I was home, restless, and my wife diagnosed me with ADD, Adventure Deficit Disorder. It was time for my next adventure, and I decided I was going to attempt to climb Mt Denali. I explained it to my wife. It's the tallest peak in North America. It's in Alaska, close to the Arctic Circle. The elevation is over 20,000 feet and is considered the most strenuous of the 7 summits, the tallest peak on each of the 7 continents. The weather is more unstable than Everest and Vincent in Antarctica, and I'd be on the mountain for 3 weeks. She, as always, was awesome and very supportive. I spent a year and a half preparing mentally and physically. I trained 6 days a week, strength training, hill workouts, pulling a log around our property through the grass and mud every Saturday with a 50-pound pack for miles. Living in the Midwest, where there are no mountains, I joked I was the Midwestern mountaineer. Every time I thought of the expedition, I got butterflies. The training, the risks, the unknowns. I didn't know if my training was going to be enough. If I became injured, exhausted, or mentally beat down on the mountain, I wouldn't be able to just go home. It may take a week to down climb my way back to base camp. As the time got closer, the expedition took more and more mental space in my head. Then, I got sick on my 50th birthday, 60 days prior to departure, which I missed a week of training. Then at 45 days out, I dislocated 2 ribs while training, which made it hurt to walk, sit, and breathe. I had 3 goals for the expedition. 1, to come home. 2, to suffer well, meaning keeping a positive attitude and maintaining self-discipline despite the hardships. And number 3, to summit. I arrived in Anchorage and met the team. We were a diverse group of 10, with team members being from Australia, Senegal, the UK, Holland, and the US. 3 women and 7 men. At the airfield, a ranger came and gave us a warning. Your rescue plan, if you get in trouble, is to rescue yourself. It could be many days before anyone could come offer assistance. And with that motivational talk, we loaded our gear onto 2 small airplanes and headed to base camp. We each carried 150 pounds of gear, a 50-pound backpack, pulling a 100-pound sled. There were multiple risks: avalanches, snow and windstorms, crevasses, falls, altitude sickness, frostbite. At night, I could hear the avalanches crashing down like long drawn-out thunder. Luckily, they weren't close to our camp. We had a lot of long, hard days climbing thousands of feet for 6, 8, 10 hours. My mountain boots took a toll on my feet and simply wore off multiple layers of skin until they were raw and blistered, which I then taped up. The UV rays are so intense at altitude that everything is radiated and practically sterile. We covered the bottom of our noses because the sun reflects off of the ground and you can literally sunburn the inside of your nostrils. I sunburned my lower lip on day 2. It then blistered and cracked. During the day I would cover it with a face mask, but the moisture from the breath would freeze the cloth to my lip, and as I would remove the face mask for a drink, it would repeatedly tear off the wound. It cracked and bled every time I tried to eat for the next 3 weeks. I also sunburned the roof of my mouth. I was breathing hard and kept my mouth open one day, and the sun reflected from the ground and into my mouth. I learned to keep my mouth shut or covered. As we got higher, the weather got colder, down to -20 with high winds and snow. We did everything in the cold. Climbed in the cold, ate in the cold, slept in the cold, went to the bathroom in the cold. This last one was interesting, as your hands and fingers got colder and numb, and your toilet paper was getting snowed on with the wind and snow biting at your backside. At night, I would have to put my contact lenses in my vest pocket of one of my jackets that I slept in order to thaw them out by morning. The positive was we were able to carry perishable foods in large sacks because everything stayed frozen. We were eating 5,000 calories a day for fuel and to stay warm. We also had to melt snow for water. As we ascended to higher altitude, it became harder and harder to breathe with less oxygen. The atmosphere is even thinner because we were so close to the Arctic. As we slowly made our way up the mountain, we switched from snowshoes to crampons. We climbed through scorching sun, snow, deep snow, clouds, ice, wind, and cold. Living in the elements, your needs become very basic: food, water, shelter, and managing your temperature. The pleasures are simpler as well. On day 8, we changed to a fresh pair of underwear and socks. It was marvelous. It was extremely beautiful. Every day was like living in a National Geographic movie. We were on glaciers for 3 weeks. The slow flow of the ice, the mountains, it was breathtaking, literally. But that was probably because of the altitude. We made it to the second to the last camp and spent a couple of days acclimating, getting ready for the final push to the summit. The weather, however, was not being very kind. The temperatures were cold even by Denali standards, and the winds were 15 to 20 mile an hour, and it was much colder and windier at the final camp. We waited multiple days for a weather window. We watched other teams take off and climb. We also witnessed 3 helicopters that had to life flight climbers off that got in trouble. One, who we later learned had passed away due to altitude sickness. And then there were 3 additional teams that needed rescue by the Rangers. We could see the peak, and we could see the lenticular cloud had formed. These form when there are strong winds and snow around the peak of a mountain. We were so close, 3 days from summiting, and we had to wait for a weather window. We climbed and cached some of our food supply higher on the mountain, so if a weather window opened, we would have a lighter load and could move quicker. But we were burning through our 21 days, and we were about out of time. Determining whether to keep pushing and attempting to summit is a complex situation emotionally. What is the level of risk that should be taken? I wanted to summit, but I also didn't want to have a frost injury and lose toes and fingers, or worse. The wind never stopped, and as my tent mate Rolly told me early on the trip, it's not the cold that you should be afraid of, it's the wind. The weather window we needed never came. We had a team meeting, and it was determined we would not be going up. We were turning around. We were out of time. The 1.5 years of commitment, the expense, the toil, for what? I reflected on the 3 goals I initially laid out. To summit, which was not going to happen. To suffer well. Throughout the expedition, I was able to keep a positive attitude and self-discipline. And the number 1 goal I was going to achieve was I was coming home. And as the saying goes, home is where your story begins. Sometimes it's also your destination.